Hi everyone, welcome to the Art Workshop. My name is Christopher Epling. Thanks for tuning in today. We really appreciate you being here with us, and we have a special activity planned for you today. We're going to be drawing something that's related to at the time of the airing or recording of this video, I should say. We're right in the middle of summer. It's hot and it's humid, and I always think of when I see the green lush mountains and all the heat just radiating off the landscape. I think, well, you know, this is pretty hot, but imagine being in the middle of the rainforest or something like that. So that could be a little worse. So in today's show, we're going to be actually drawing a scene from the rainforest, a tropical scene, using a couple of subjects in our landscape. We're going to be drawing a couple of birds, macaws, parrots. We're going to be drawing those inside of the landscape for our drawing. Today we're going to be working with watercolor, so if you have watercolor at home, please grab that out. If not, you don't really need it. You can use crayons, you could use colored pencil, you could just do this in pencil and ink, or just pencil it by itself. So as long as you follow along though, we really would like that, because this show is really geared for you and to see your creations based off what we do here together. So if you were to create something, we have an email address that's established that you could send your work into, and you could send it over to us. We'd love to share your work here on the show or a future show. Be sure and include your name, also maybe your age, however much information you want to share, that's great. The email address is piketv99@gmail.com. So if you get a chance to send something in, we'd love to see it and share it with everyone here with our viewing audience. I'm going to talk a little bit about the materials today. Now, like I said, you don't really necessarily need this stuff, but I've brought in a few things that I use. Watercolor is one of my favorite mediums to use, and they have these kits that you can get. Now, this is a very probably over elaborate kit what you would need starting out. This kit, it's a specific brand that makes these, but there's tons of different types of variations of this. So you have like Winsor Newton's one. Canson is also a brand that makes these, but you don't need any specific brand. If you have something you can take with you like this is known as a travel kit. So you can see all the bricks, and that's what we call these little slots of color. These are bricks. And the neat thing about travel kits is that you can actually take these and you can replace one color with another color, or you can exchange colors. You could set up your entire palette of what you're taking along with you to meet whatever it is you want to use it for. So if you're going out and, let's say, going on a hike, and you're going to take a break halfway through that, and you're going to sit down and sketch whatever it is you see, you want something that you can easily pack with you, and you may want to plan your colors accordingly too. Today we're using a lot of different bright colors in our tutorial, so that's why I brought the colors I did. Now, this is a preset kit. You can find these at the dollar store. You can find these anywhere. Art supplies, school supplies usually have those if you have a section with school supplies. These are bricks too. They're round, of course. These are square, but these you can't interchange. So once you've used up all of the pigment that's inside of the brick of the round version, they're gone. But a couple of options for you. Now, you're going to be seeing me use, of course, these kits here in a little bit, but instead of a traditional brush like this, I'm going to be using what's called Aqua Brushes. And the only real difference is with these brushes, the water's kept in a reservoir that is connected to the brush. So you would fill up this section, of course, and then as you work, squeeze a little bit, put a little bit of pressure, it releases the water into the brush, and then you can pull pigment up from there, instead of the traditional way of having a brush and then dipping that brush, going back and forth. I'm also going to be using, of course, a pencil. This looks like a pen, but it's a mechanical pencil, and I have an eraser. So if you have something close to all of this today, you can follow along, even if you only have maybe a couple of items. You definitely need a pencil though, starting out. So grab your paper and let's begin. Now I'm going to use up as much space of this as I can. So starting out at the top up here, the first thing I want you to do, I use a method called the circle method a lot, and all that is really is to help establish where things are going to be drawn on your paper or your canvas. And then once you create simple shapes, you take those shapes and you start to add to them, and sometimes pressing down harder as you do, the different types of features that you want to draw. So we turn this circle into a macaw later, and you'll see how we do that. So starting out with just a circle in the top right hand corner, then drop down below that, and I want you to place what almost looks like an egg right here, the egg shape, connecting up into this first circle. Now we're going to duplicate both of these shapes down in the lower left-hand portion of our page too. Starting out first with our circle. You can make this one a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, depending on what you want, or the same size. And then after we have our circle drawn, we want to add the egg shape just below it. So these are 4 elements of our composition. And in art, composition is really the makeup of what it is you see, where you place things on the paper or canvas. Composition matters because you can affect whoever's looking at your work in certain ways. They can see depth by how you choose your composition. Things seem smaller as they're farther away from you. Things closer to you seem larger. You can also get a feeling of, established feeling from composition too. So you can imagine if I only had one isolated tree in a very, very vast landscape with one bird on it, that could give the feeling, I guess, of someone looking at it almost as they're being, they're alone, this bird's by itself. In this case, our composition is going to be close up, and we're going to have 2 birds with a lot of green behind it in the sky. So this almost gives a feeling of maybe community or closeness. So starting back up here where you first started with this circle in the top right corner, we want to add the beak of the macaw now. Starting at the top of the circle, I'm going to draw a line coming out, stopping about right there, and once you stop, you want to pull this shape coming back in towards the circle now, just like that. So there's one beak. I'm going to add a beak to the second bird here. Come back in now like that. Once we have the beaks drawn, we'll go ahead and put a placeholder up here for where the eye will be. So I'll put a circle here and a circle here. So now we have the beak, the head, the shape of the body, and the eye. Inside of the circle, I'm going to add a couple more circles. This is the eye shine. So one setting right on top of the other, almost like half a snowman. There we go. Now, once I have the pupils drawn in, jumping back over to the beak area, and I'm going to draw a straight, not really straight, but a line coming down following the flow of the 2 lines you established to make the beak. So from here to here, connect those 2 with a little bit of a curve to that line. We'll do that on both birds. Okay, good. Now, we have the basic shapes of a bird at least. What I want to do now is go in and put a little more detail. I'm going to go up here to the beak first, and I'm going to come out to the main tip and pull a line coming straight back at a little bit of an angle to show the lower portion of the beak. And another one here. You could sketch these out roughly. This is the part of the planning process where we don't really want to be too confined to have to make the exact line we want. This is the process where we'll be erasing a lot, going back and changing too. Starting back at the top of the first circle now, I'm going to add a little bit of some texture over this line. What I mean by that is I'm basically following the line of the first circle down to the oval, and then following the back part, the right side of this oval down, and I'm just making a few little jagged shapes that kind of resemble feathers sticking out, nothing too much. The same now for the front part, the left side here. I want to do the same on this bird. So the 2 shapes that we drew at the beginning, those 2 shapes are being used, but they're not necessarily part of the composition. The line isn't. They're just there to help us. So once I have these jagged lines drawn around the body, I'm going to jump back in again now, and I'm going to draw a line coming down this way and a line coming the opposite direction on this bird. So now we have 2 birds, and we need to have them setting somewhere. So what I'm going to do is draw now some foliage or some leaves behind them. I want to draw the leaves at an angle because dealing with another art term, perspective, it helps to establish where we are, the viewer, looking at what it is we're drawing, or someone else is looking at your work, where we are in relation to what we're looking at. So starting at the top over here in the right hand corner, very lightly, I'm going to draw a line coming down at an angle, and then another line coming up. So it almost makes like a V. Now this line's just there to help guide us. All along the top part of this line, we're going to be drawing shapes to show us that there is a tree line there or foliage. So starting on this side, you're going to make a series of shapes that looks like this. Okay, so there's 3 parts to this shape. There's one tip that comes out and down, a larger one, and then a smaller one again. You want to place these all along the top part of this line. Sometimes you will see portions of leaves, other times you won't. You may see only a little bit of a leaf there. And I'm going to continue this now. And as I get further down towards the bottom part of my V, I want to make these shapes a little bit smaller as I go towards the middle. Again, like we said earlier, composition and perspective. So using composition and perspective, we can give the effect that there's some distance to where we're standing in relation to where the tree line is. Coming down this direction and back up. Now we have a series of these leaves. Way off here in the distance, we could add a circle for the sun, and we'll color that in a little bit. Now we're going to add some more of these shapes all throughout the middle part of our drawing, between the birds and around the top part of each bird on each side. So just add a few shapes here and there to resemble that these are all leaves sticking out from behind our birds. You may want to make some much larger as you get towards the bottom of your drawing. And when we start to add color here in just a little bit, I'm going to talk again on something that I've brought up a few times in the show. Using color to show light and how light interacts with whatever it is you're working on with your drawing. Color is a very effective tool, obviously, for showing distance, how one thing is in relation to another thing in your drawing, size-wise, position, those sorts of things. And we're going to be touching more on that today. And the rule of thumb is when you're working with color and you want to show light reflecting off surfaces, is you always go from light to dark in terms of tone of the color. So starting out, we're going to use a light tone of the color we choose and then a darker tone of that color. You do not need every color of the rainbow in order to create a lot of tone. In fact, one color can have a variation of tones to it. And you may even find, if you get into, at some point, some of you may already be into art so much that you go out and you start buying individual paint tubes of different paint. There's different names given to all these different tones. So a brown, when we think of just the color brown, the much pressure that you put down, if I had a colored pencil here and I started to go in and color this with a colored pencil, the amount of pressure that I use when I push down is going to affect the tone of that colored pencil. The more pressure I put down, the more tone I get. It's going to be darker. One colored pencil of any certain color can give you tons of different tones, and each one of those tones in art usually has a tube of paint associated with it. So you could go out and literally buy that tone of color as its own color. And a couple that come to mind is the burnt umber series. You have light umber, burnt umber. It's a real fancy term for just basically tan and the different variations of the tone of that light brown color. So it's pretty interesting. It can be confusing, but it really depends on how far you want to get into something. So it's up to you if you want to venture down that road, but really all you need though is just a set of primary colors and a few of your complementary colors and you're good to go. Okay, I've erased a few of these lines that I used to establish all the subjects in the drawing. So I've erased portions of this circle and oval, and you could do the same thing with yours too. What I want to do now, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to trace over all these lines that I want to keep. So the reason that I'm doing this, after I erased most of the circles and things, is that whenever I start to add color in here, I need to know where exactly do I need to color in relation to the other parts of the drawing. So a nice line to help guide you is what you need. So I'm just tracing over the lines that I created earlier. I'm going to draw in a little more pressure, the lines I want to keep, and I'm going to lessen the pressure with lines I don't really want. Right around the eye here, let's go ahead and add a shape coming up that's going to be divided now into two colors. So the only thing I did is I drew a line coming down to the chin from the top of the head, and then I drew a line coming out from the beak connecting that. And we'll put two different colors inside of this for our bird. Now we can start really working on our colors. So I'm going to grab my palette out here. I have a few choices for green, as you can see. I'm going to grab a brush that has a pretty nice thick tip to it. And we're going to start pulling pigment now and putting it over into our drawing. There we go, this will work. I'm going to start out with a very light green, and with watercolor how it works is the more water that you have, the less tone you're going to get. So the lighter tone you're going to get from each swab of your brush. Okay, and I'm adding a little bit of color down in the cake part of this actually to break up the block a little bit. So the more color the more water I use, the lighter the tone. And I'm going to go in now, and I'm going to start to put a very light tone of color, and I'm going to choose to place this color very purposefully. So on each leaf that you've drawn, I want you to follow one side of that leaf with this color and leave the other side of the leaf without any color. And the reason for this is we're already starting to work towards establishing light source in our drawing. So shadow is cast anytime light is present, and as you know, with shadows, usually shadows form on the opposite side of where the light source is. In our case, the light source is that big ball at the top. It's the sun. So just based off what you've seen in nature and based off what you see play out every day with physics and how light bends, and you know that we're going to choose the side that's farthest away from our light source to be darker tone than the portion that's closest. So that's why I am going down in between the leaves here, and I'm actually adding a darker tone of this green in all the little areas that are not being represented by the light source. So in between these, and then of course way down in here, see, the further you get away from the tops of the trees, we're going to have even more shadow. So you can see that I'm leaving out a lot of these different areas where the leaves are. And a drawing of this size, you really probably should have a larger brush, or you're going to be spending a lot of time. Now if you're using crayons or color pencils, you get this effect, like I said earlier, but from pressure, the amount of pressure you put down with your pencil. So I'm going to cover up at the top. Now I'm actually working on the leaves here, and as you can see, I've used more water as I get closer to the top of the tree and less water around the bottom edges of the leaves. And we'll have a couple variations of green. You don't need all these different types of green. You could start out with one color and literally use that one color to represent your green throughout your drawing, as long as you are very, very selective on how much water you use if you're using watercolor and how much pressure you're using if you're using color pencil. So we'll go down this side. Now, as we're starting to change our position here, as we're starting to get towards the left portion of our drawing, we want to consider how the light source is changing a little bit. So on the leaves on the far left, we may have a little bit of different application of the color than we have on the other side. So we may actually start to fill in a very light tone across the entire surface of the leaves that is farthest to the top. And then as you go down, of course, like we did over here, we're going to add more and more tone. Now as you can see, there's a lot of space here to fill up. So I'm going to take a second and we're going to speed paint through all these little sections, and we're going to pick back up again here in a second with our next application of our tone. All right, so we've added a light tone on the portions of the leaves that we want to keep. Now I'm going back through this again, and you notice I'm being very sporadic with this, and I'm placing it in areas that I know have a lot of shadow. This is a darker tone of green, and I want to do this all throughout the bottom part of the drawing. And you can also see that in terms of my lines, I've went outside the lines here and there, and that's the effect that I want to have with this. If you were to take your time and literally treat this like a coloring book page, you could do that too. But the effect that I was hoping to get from this today was almost like a very loose application of color, not really like something that's too loose. I want you to be able to tell what we're doing, but the goal is to have fun and to enjoy the process of creating and playing and messing around with paints. Down at the bottom, as you can see, this darker tone now is being filled in between all these leaves. You may add some here and there, depending on where you may think the shadow would be. Of course, the shadow down at the bottom will probably be a lot heavier down here. And it's one of those things that you really have to just kind of judge, especially if you're painting from something from inside your mind and you don't really have an image you're looking at. You have to be, you know, the judge of where this light source is going to be and how it's going to be interacting with everything. If you're looking off of a painting or a pre-existing piece of work and you're wanting to, let's say, draw that or paint what you're looking at in order to practice, it can help you to see how other artists have decided to use light and paint in order to show light, I should say, reflection. So, as for us here today, this is all out of the top of the noggin, and we're going to try our best to imagine where this light source would be. Now, as I'm moving up, I'm going to start to add the same tone now in between the leaves up near the tips of the beaks up here. And I may even want to go back like through this area here where the body is, and I may want to add even more tone, but you have to allow the watercolor a chance to dry. The only probably downside to using watercolor, well, there's a few, but one of the most, probably the biggest one anyway, is that you have to give it time to dry, and the more times you apply color to one area, the more moisture you're putting on the paper. And obviously, after a while, paper can only hold so much. What happens is the paper may start to break down. Now, there is watercolor paper you can get, and that's a real effective way to get around it. But even with watercolor paper, there's just so much. So you want to be able to give it time to dry in between applying different color, tone. If you don't, and you just kind of keep going on top of it and over and over and over again, it's going to break down a lot faster. Now right now I'm just having fun with this tone. I'm just going in. I'm placing it in sort of just sporadic areas. I should say sporadically in areas. Like that. And you want to fill up as much space as you can. Now the green is probably one of the most important colors outside of course the real colorful beaks that we're going to be putting on in a second. So it's also the most area that we're going to have to cover in this drawing. There we go. So we're going to give this chance now to really dry, and we may add some more tone into these branches and leaves in a little bit. I'll get this area over here a little bit more, and then we can jump on to the next portion. Now the next portion we're going to be looking at is the beaks, and the beaks of these macaw are going to be orange. So if you have an orange color, that's what we want to grab out next. I'm going to be pulling just a little bit of color, loading my brush up with water, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to start down at the bottom, the tip of the beak here. I'm going to bring it across. Now as I go towards the top of the beak, I'm going to use less water, which will give us, of course, the effect that this is closer to the light source. As I'm working towards the bottom of the beak, I'm going to use more color, less water. So down here, less, and then up at the top, lighter as you go up. And like I said at the beginning of the video, the rule of thumb that I use is you always go from light to dark. And you can see how that beak kind of turned out. You have a very, very nice, solid, darker tone towards the bottom. And you can even apply that first too if you want. And then as you go up, just get lighter. And you'll get better as you go along in terms of how much water you need. You kind of judge it. You can eyeball it. You have to get used to the, what brush you're using, because all brushes hold water differently, especially these Aqua brushes. And you can see that I'm dipping this Aqua brush actually in water as I'm going. And the reason for that is this is a large surface that we're working on today. This canvas is pretty big. And I want to be able to fill up this spot, each spot I'm working on, pretty quickly. And the water flow from the reservoir doesn't go fast enough for me. So I'm just giving it a little bit of a boost by dipping it in water too. So now we have a tone on the beaks. We're going to jump now and actually pull a dark gray. If you don't have gray, use black, and just really get your brush nice and wet, and that way your tone will be a little bit lighter, be like a gray color. What we're going to do with this is we're going to fill up all of the area of the bird from the back part of the eye here, going down the back part of the head into the body. You can see that I've used a little more color in the back area, because just the same with the rules that we followed with the leaves, this area is further away from our light source, so it will be darker. And you have to continually apply different types of swatches of color. So we're going to apply one go at it, which is going to be this first attempt, and then we'll go back over it again after this dries, and we'll add more. Yeah, if you've drawn this pretty small, you get a really good advantage, because you're not going to have to use so much color, and you're not going to have to worry about working with a small brush. If you've drawn this as big as I have and you have a small brush, you may be here a while. So you want to kind of, plan ahead a little bit, and kind of be aware of how big you're going to be working, and then adjust your materials to fit that. Over here now, I'm going to really pull out some tone on the back part of this bird, going up the side of the head here. And you can actually throw in more color in here. So with gray, we're starting out, it's a color that, if you use a different color inside of the gray, it's really going to show no matter what it is, because it's a neutral color. It's a color that doesn't complement a whole lot of other colors very well, except for other shades of gray and black. But if you add color inside of the gray, which we'll do in a little bit, you can see that it really pulls out some of the shadows that we want to try to capture too. So we may use a purple, you may go in and use a blue. I would stay away from using yellows or very cool colors. Very light tones of any color. Once you've established the gray and the black, you want to go back and add sort of darker tones of a color inside of that, so it blends well. There's our first go with the gray. Now inside of the eye too, the pupils up here, I'm going to pull some more black. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to paint all around those two circles that we created inside of the pupil there. So, well, this is probably the light shine that we'll use. There we go, something like that. And make sure you do that for, of course, both of them. while I'm working with a color, I'll stick with that color and use it anywhere I need it, and then I'll move on to the next color after I'm done. The reason that helps is that your brush, when you load color into it, of course that brush is in there. If you switch colors, you're going to have to adjust and then clean out your brush accordingly and stuff. So we have some very basic colors on here right now. We have, of course, green, and we have our black and our orange. Jump up to the sun up here, and here's where I'm going to pull some of this yellow. And I want to go ahead and get the sun colored in. Leave a little bit towards the edge over there. I'll go back over in a second and add a lighter tone of that on this side. You can leave white with watercolor. It's okay to leave portions of your drawing blank. Now for the sky, I'm pulling some blue that I already have squeezed out up here at the top, and I'm going to go all around the edges of my painting first with this off blue, and I'm going to pull this color up as I go with my brush towards the top of the canvas. I'm going to go on that side, put a little bit more towards the bottom down here. Now after you've actually added all the color that you're going to add to your painting with watercolor, you let it dry and then go back over it with a marker, with a sharp tip marker. And we're going to trace over the lines that we want to keep, and it's really going to make the color versus the pencil lines will fade away a little bit, and then we'll have this nice line that makes up the boundaries of their subjects in their drawing. I'll go towards the top up here, just the corners with this off blue, and then as we go towards the sun, we will lighten it up more. As of right now. So I'm going to grab this other blue now in this kit. This is a very light blue. It's literally a sky blue. And I'm going to go all around the tips of the tree line here where the leaves are sticking up. And I'm going to throw this color down in between all the leaves. And the trick here is you want to keep sort of the same tone around an imaginary line that goes across your drawing. So I don't want to take this very high in one area and then go very low in another. I want to be consistent with the line that I make going across the drawing. So what that means is in some areas you're going to see this blue popping up higher than others. Like right here, we only see a little bit of it. There's a little bit of a curve to it. Now I'm going to go back again with the sky blue, and this time as I get closer to the sun, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to lessen the pressure that I'm putting down with my brush, and I'm also going to only use a little bit of water. I want the area around the sun to be very light, and I want the areas away from the sun to be darker. So we're going to continue this process all across the canvas. Now, I'll just kind of talk on this for a second because I've had a few questions about this in the past, and this is something that I've had to do research into because I wasn't very sure about it either. I'm still not, to be honest with you, but from what I've learned, I'll share with you anyway. So gouache, it's a type of medium, gouache is. Gouache is like a combination of watercolor and acrylic paint. Now, in the past, and I'll be very, very honest here, I have a little bit of experience with acrylic, but I don't really like it a whole lot, to be honest with you. I just really don't. Everybody has their choice of medium. And I was commissioned a few years back to paint this elk for the city of Elkhorn. I did 2 of them. And I wanted to create an acrylic-based painting. So I mixed water with acrylic paint. And it was working pretty good at first. and then the darker tones that I wanted, it became a little more difficult to work with. So I found gouache. And when I found out that gouache was a combination of those two, I thought, well, this is interesting. And I tried it out, and it is. It's really, really good to mix with water, so it holds water well. You get a lot of variation of tone. The only bad part about it is it dries pretty fast, and you really don't have any type of thing you can go back over with it and loosen that up again, like to get it moist again so you can keep working with it. So if you're interested in watercolor, but you want something a little more control, you may want to look into gouache. And it's spelled G-O-U-A-C-H-E. Excuse me. All around the top part of the drawing, we're adding this same tone, and we're going to let that dry. Now as this dries, we're going to jump back down again, this time to our birds. One more time. And I'm going to grab some more of this black, and I'm going to really try to enhance this tone more. And when I mentioned earlier about using a different color in there, this is where we'll do that as well. So jumping in here with this black, first I'll put a coat going down the back part of it. Now I'm going to grab some purple and throw it in there with it. So as it goes, you're going to see that this is actually starting to blend a little bit more. Really darker tones towards the neck area. All the areas that have shadow, we want to keep those areas nice and darkened in with tone. And this is a fun little exercise that you can do from building a drawing from the ground up, starting off with just a sketch, and then going from there and coloring that. And then after we color, we go back again, and that's where we actually start to put in the detail with our marker. Now I'm starting to make these swashes, as you can see, kind of back and forth with my brush. And we'll break these patterns up here to kind of give the effect that there's some feathers going on, so there's some shadow in those feathers. And you just do that basically by going back and forth with your brush, taking it in different angles. As you get further towards the back of the bird, we're going to fill that in solid. A little more up towards the top here around the head. Now let's jump over here and do the same thing with this one. Now if you follow the rule of thumb of going light to dark, and you keep allowing your surface area time to dry, you will be able to keep adding layers onto your drawing. And what I'll do for the last portion of the show is you're going to see that I'm going to go in and follow this rule, and I'm going to keep adding tones of this color, darker tones of each color, until I get the effect of shadow. And you're going to see that time lapsed, but you should be able to follow along with me based on the instructions so far. You repeat those instructions over and over, light to dark, watch the amount of water you're using, and be aware of your light source. And you can kind of see how this will start to come together now as we try to finish out our macaws. So everyone, you can see that the painting here has really took a little bit of a shift towards the end. And the reason for that is I thought the ink looked really neat as I was applying it. And I kept going a little bit here within the leaves to show a little more shadow. I may rework a drawing a million times before I get to where I want. But I will tell you this much. So today I'll learn something, which with art you're constantly doing. First of all, I knew what I wanted to draw, and I knew exactly kind of the colors I wanted to use. What I didn't take into account for was the size of the drawing. So I went really big scale so you could see well, and what happened was I brought these smaller brushes in with little tiny tips. So when you're working with small brushes on a large surface, you can imagine painting a house with a toothbrush. So it could take a while. And that's what happened. So I chose the wrong brushes today. Now what would probably work better if you're going to work on a scale this big, instead of using these little cakes that we talked about, probably the best idea would actually get the tubes of watercolor paint and squirt those out on a palette beside your drawing, and then use a larger natural brush, either sable hair or natural brush hair. I'm sorry, synthetic or sable brush hair. Probably be the best option, but I think overall it came out kind of neat. We have these cartoony watercolor macaws, and I'm happy with it. I hope you had a good time. I hope you followed along. If you did, I would love to see what you came up with. Please share it with us. We have our email address you'll find on the screen, packtv99@gmail.com. So you'll be able to just send that over to us. Include your name and maybe your age, and we will definitely share that here on the show. So thank you for tuning in. Tropical scene today, hot weather, but we'll get through it and try to stay cool in the meantime. We really appreciate your viewership more than anything, because this show is for you and it's about you. Until next time, I'm Christopher Epling on behalf of Pike TV. Thanks for participating, and keep drawing.